Wow, the smell is unbelievable. That is liquefied fermented cow waste being dumped directly onto the fields. And wow. No wonder the St. Joe River smells like cow shit.
My name's Tish Odell. We're standing here on the shore of the Maumee River. And for people who don't know, and that's in northwest Ohio, the Maumee River leads right into Lake Erie. And I'm a organizer for the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. It's a public interest law firm, and we assist communities who are usually trying to stop some environmental harm. So the one law that I have to say is the nearest and dearest to my heart is the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. The Lake Erie Bill of Rights said that Lake Erie has the right to exist, flourish, thrive, and regenerate for her own right. Even if that doesn't benefit us humans, she has the right. When I started thinking about it that way, it changed my whole perspective. And I started noticing all the harms. I mean, Cleveland is a port city. It was an industrial city. So all of a sudden, the coal piles next to the lake that I never gave a second thought to, I started looking at it as, oh my God, that waste is going into Lake Erie. And of course, coming from Cleveland, the city where the river caught on fire, that's all I would hear. And so as I would go talking to communities, and a lot of the activists, especially the environmental activists, they bring that up. You know, they'll go, well, the river doesn't burn anymore. And I'd be like, well, that's a very, that's your standard you're setting, that's a really low standard. Nature is a living entity that our lives depend on, and it does not have rights. We view nature as property, and it's property to be owned by the owner, or in the case of Lake Erie, the state of Ohio claims to own it. And so when something is owned by someone, they can exploit it, they can destroy it, they can do what they want because it's their property. If we made decisions based on considering not only how things affect us and our economics, but how it affects everything that's living in that environment and in that ecosystem, we would make totally different decisions. But we don't first in our heads have that connection. So we don't think that way. We only think of the money and the economics. In my mind, the end goal would be we wouldn't need a law to say we wouldn't poison ourselves. I mean, it's ridiculous. We believe we're here to manage the environment. You know, and you even hear it in the terms like the Bureau of Land Management, forest management. You know, we think somehow we have to manage nature.
My name's Terry Lodge. I am not a native to Toledo, Ohio, but that's the region where I live in northwestern Ohio on the western edge of Lake Erie. Always had this fantasy and love for the Great Lakes. From the anti-Vietnam War boomer generation, a lot of boomers went to law school and have litigated since about 1977 against nuclear power of various installations and locations and nuclear waste. And so I've done a lot of free speech cases. I've done a lot of other environmental support kinds of work, have defended civil disobedience protesters against our more recent wars, as well as against some environmentally desecratory projects. I found CELDF by knowing Tish Odell, the organizer. We are trying to encourage people to take power back locally. And we're essentially trying to take advantage of a clause that is more or less present in all 50 state constitutions that basically says that when the government is no longer meeting the needs of the people, they have an absolute right to abolish or change it. In 2014, there was a terrible several-day shutdown of Toledo's water intakes, which are in Maumee Bay, which cut off the water supply, the municipal water supply, to approximately 500,000 people and required bottled water to be brought in. Orders for people to, you can't boil it out, don't even shower in it, certainly don't wash your infants in it, that kind of thing. The Lake Erie Bill of Rights is initiated, petitioned throughout the city of Toledo. The requisite number of signatures are gathered. It's a local law that would have empowered citizens to file suit to basically protect the main water source of the city of Toledo, which is Lake Erie, as fed into by the Maumee River. So a special election was held. The measure passed by 3-2. 60% or so of the electorate voted in support of it. And before the federal courts opened the next day after the election day in February of 2019, lawsuit had been filed by an agricultural partnership in Wood County, which is the first county south of Toledo.
I will never say the Lake Erie Bill of Rights was a failure, even though it was overturned, just because it opened so many eyes. And so just the fact that it got overturned, I'll always say it was a win, because so many people learned about rights of nature or heard of rights of nature from that effort. If we're going to actually change the system, we're going to have to go for what we want, not what we're allowed to do or what we think we can do. It's going to have to be a real shift in our thinking and our belief in our own power system and what we can do as people.
Bridgewater Dairy is just beyond that wood line up there over the little hill. There's 9 million gallons of liquid cow waste stored in lagoons. I don't know if they've thought this through, but we had 2 inches of rain yesterday. That was a tree limb falling. And if the lagoon were to rupture, there's nothing stopping it from flowing directly downhill from the cattle farm directly into this creek.
Algae largely historically has been kept at bay and not perceived as much of a problem until the last 25 or 30 years, when something that's not particularly detectable to us year in and year out is the gradual cycle of warming of the Great Lakes. Lake Erie is the southernmost of the Great Lakes, so is of course likely to warm the most and the earliest. It's also, on average, the shallowest of the Great Lakes. Well, then you feed the algae with phosphorus, which we'll call manure or shit. So the algae does really well in shallow water, and what you have is a situation where you have very loosely underregulated animal factories that are adding enormous quantities of phosphorus to the lake. Phosphorus and nitrogen. Those are the growth accelerators for the algae. The algae produces microcystin, which is a neuroblocker kind of chemical, which can be fatal to people and animals. There are lots of anecdotal stories of people who have brought their dogs to swim in the shallows in Lake Erie, and they end up sick and having kidney failure or other kinds of sudden organic failure within 24 hours, and they die. There also have been stories of people who were hospitalized for substantial periods of time because of the toxic load to their bodies just from swallowing some of the water or absorbing it through the skin. So you have a situation where over the years, especially since the late 1990s to the present, there have been, in really rainy spring years in particular, there have been huge volumes of algae that have formed and microcystin that has, of course, come with it. The problem is that 20 years ago, there were probably a few dozen confined animal feeding operations in the Maumee Basin. Now there are hundreds, and as I'm saying, probably, possibly, close to 1,000.
We were at the new Poo Lagoon. They are filling it. All you have to do is drive by and you can tell. I'm sitting outside of the Fry Farm in Montpelier, Ohio. The Fry Farm does all the poo spreading for Bridgewater Dairy. They have erected a temporary, well, it's not temporary, it's a lagoon here on the Fry Farm. And currently, the lagoon at the Bridgewater Dairy is completely full of liquefied cow shit. What they're doing now is they're transporting the cow manure from Bridgewater Dairy to Montpelier, Ohio, and filling this lagoon. Those tankers are full of liquefied cow shit. That hose reel right there is what they use to run across the field to spread all the poo out. This is actually an industrial waste operation, is the best way to put it. And they're running 24/7 right now, filling this lagoon, and the smell is unbelievable. I am downwind, and honestly, I'm skipping breakfast. One truck after another filled full of shit.
My name's Sherry Fleming, and I live on a small homestead just north of Bryan, Ohio in Williams County. And Williams County is located in the far northwest corner of Ohio. I graduated from Ohio State. My major was animal science production. At one time, a major like that would have been called animal husbandry. Like it was taking care of the animal, like the needs of the animal. And then, like when I went there, the major was animal science production. It was production. You began to see the movement of moving livestock from being in an outdoor situation into more and more confined situations. And the last operation I was at, it was in just around 77, 78, was totally confinement. And I guess I told myself that I was providing what I thought was the best care that these animals could have for the situation they were in. But after working there for about a year, I just felt like it was inhumane. You'd have to go back decades where you had smaller farms, and there would have been a balance between the amount of livestock you have and the amount of land to apply that. So it's something that could have provided a really good fertilizer base to grow crops on. But when you get into like a large dairy of 5,000 head, I mean, they produce so much waste that they're exporting it. Because if they don't, it'll end up saturating the ground. This area is the Great Black Swamp. And so in order for it to be farmed, they had to get a lot, had to drain water. So you have this really intensive field tile system underground that collects water, and it goes into the streams and on a lot of it into Lake Erie. So you have the opportunity for whatever is applied on the land that can migrate into the field tile. It doesn't mean that it all does, but there is that risk of that. And in an area like ours where you have an aquifer, especially along the rivers, it's called recharge, where the water actually from the surface can move back into the aquifer, and you could have that happen in reverse, so that whatever is applied on the land, there's a risk in especially a recharge area that could get down into your aquifer. There's something in the Clean Water Act, and it's called TMDL, Total Maximum Daily Load, where you look at, okay, how many things are going to possibly put stuff into the waterways, and look at that. And so if you get too much crap or waste or whatever, our wastewater treatment plants go into our waterways, our source of drinking water. But if you don't begin to look at what all you're putting in now, why keep letting more and more come in? And that's what we're seeing right now. We've got a problem in Lake Erie. They say they're trying to fix it, but at the same time, it's like this big illusion that's been created where, because I have a manure management plan and say, well, any manure that I apply to the land is going to be taken up by crops, it's not going to go down into the tile system. But it is happening. Whether they like it or not, it's happening. But nobody wants to say stop. A lot of times you'll see this picture of the happy cow that's out in the field, which is where you might think that a dairy cow would be. And most people probably don't realize when you go by these facilities that they're these extremely big metal buildings, and you may or may not see the silhouette of the cow that's inside these large freestall barns.
Right.
So a lot of livestock production that where you have what's called a CAFO, a concentrated animal feeding operation, animals are enclosed inside buildings, especially hogs and poultry. It's almost entirely enclosed unit so that there's no natural sunlight even getting into the building.
We've been here 2 days looking at big farms, and we haven't seen a live animal yet at any of them.
But to think of the sensory deprivation that these animals live under, if people were able to get more of a realistic view of how their meat, milk, and eggs are produced, that it could make a difference and change how they look at their food. Because right now it's so much based on economics, and there's factors left out of it that people don't understand. There's exploitation of the workers, there's exploitation of the animal, there's exploitation of the environment where these facilities are located, because basically they're looking at what does it cost them to put weight on, either in the form of meat or egg production or milk production, to provide that product as cheaply as possible to the public. But there's a lot of factors like nutritional value that are often overlooked and aren't given the value that they should be given when we're looking at buying a product. If all we look is that sticker on the product in the grocery store, it doesn't tell you a lot about that product and how it could, has been produced.
Well, that's intentional too.
Yeah.
I mean,
they
the
don't
labeling
want-
laws,
yeah.
right? That's actually, if you put certain things on labels, you're violating a corporation's free speech rights. They've already had that case.
I know people that would eat healthier food, but they just can't afford to.
Well, that's because we're subsidizing this.
Right.
We're
right.
subsidizing the chemical industrial food production system and not subsidizing organic, healthy food production. So
there's basic commodity crops of, I know corn and soybeans, if the farmers choose to, can take subsidies. But if you're someone that's outside that system and say, if I feed my dairy cattle on grass and I don't feed corn and soybean in a feed, then I don't get that to reduce my feed costs. And so it's a more difficult form of agriculture, I think, to use ways where an animal is raised under more natural conditions, especially when you begin to look like at beef cattle that are an herbivore. They're a four-chambered animal. They're meant to eat grass. They're meant to eat hay. But when you put them on a corn-fed diet, It messes up the metabolism, and it can also affect what comes out in the manure. It's like a rigged system where even though you're trying to produce food in a healthier, more natural way, that you're pitted against a system that is given assistance to operate and produce the way they do, to even reduce their costs lower because of economies of scale they already have. So sometimes we're criticized for using the term factory farms, but when you look at the way these facilities operate, animals become so much like a production unit, just like in a factory. And whether they're a production unit, and even employees, I think, are considered production units on paper. And when you're in an operation where there's thousands of animals, I mean, there's no way that you can have a connection.
Lots of animals in a small location, they get illness, they get sick. So we give them antibiotics, we give them chemicals, things like that, and that comes back to us. I mean, whatever we do to nature comes back to us because we are nature. So we've heard a lot about the antibiotic resistance that people are having. Well, when you're giving it to the animals, that's coming back at you.
To show the relationship to nature, the waterways that are in the nearby area that end up flowing into rivers, which flow into typically in our area, into the Maumee, and then end up into the Lake Erie, the western basin of Lake Erie.
I mean, we've known about the algae problem in Lake Erie for years and years and years, and they've done testing, and they're still claiming, you know, we don't know, or the farmers up here at least are claiming they don't know what the issue is.
That's what connects to the dragline spreader, all the semis. That is 12 inches in diameter at least. It is very, very, very long. These hoses are miles long once they get them all connected together. This one here is a quarter-mile long. Oh, bumpy road, sorry. And there's the other end of it. Again, it's 12 inches in diameter. Massive. They are moving the poo line, setting it up for the spreader. This is how they do it. That is a handmade machine made specifically for these large 12-inch lines. That liquid in front of me is not water. That is liquid cow manure that's running out of this field. The dragline spreader is out there. Here he comes. Spreading poo. You can see the pattern in the soil where the spreader goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. He covers every square foot of the area. It's flowing from the injection sites directly out of the field and is pooling at the lower end of the field. This will run into the ditch. This will flow directly into the river. This will not fertilize this field.
Sherry, this place, Hillendale, this is chickens? Really? There's chickens here?
Yeah.
I haven't seen a chicken.
No.
What is this?
No, it's Hillendale Farm. From what I've heard, there's like at least 4 million laying hens in there. And I'll have to be honest with you, I've seen a number of facilities, and this one shocked me.
The size of this. I mean, just the size of it. It's like...
It's just so ominous looking. And it's this huge, tall metal building with big ventilation fans on the side. And it's just hard to imagine when there's millions of birds like that inside small cages.
Well, and who counts, right? Does anybody count if there's 4 million, 5 million? Who would count that? I mean, I don't know.
We've had on our little patch of ground at home, we've got, about 5 acres, and I've had a small flock of laying hens for over 30 years. And it's just hard to imagine when you talk. They're called battery cages, that the chickens, there's more than one in a cage. When you go to the grocery store and buy your eggs, I'm not sure if people really understand what the conditions are like. When you see terms like organic and cage-free or free range, a lot of times you think that they're produced under conditions that are more like that they're outside. And those terms can legally be used if there's certain conditions met, and they're still housed inside a big metal building.
How much waste do 4 million chickens produce, do you think?
I really couldn't tell
Just
you.
trying to think about that. It's like, oh my
Yeah.
God.
Poultry manure is very high in phosphorus.
Which then leads back to Lake Erie and the algae problem.
Right.
All of the fields around here are heavily populated with wildlife. And that right there is a field tile he's sitting on. That tile is directly connected to an underground system underneath this field. Whatever is applied to this field eventually will run over here, come to this field tile, and pour into this creek. And he will suffer. And that, by the way, is a muskrat.
This is just field stubble that's in the ditch. They will talk about putting grass filter strips to help filter contaminants off the field. And I'm sure it makes a difference, but how effective overall, what role that plays in reducing nutrient runoff.
But the idea is that if they put the chicken manure on this field and then it rained, it would come
into
to
the
this ditch.
a lot, yeah.
Right.
Pretty likely, depending on the amount of rain. I guess you see something like this, it's just a ditch by the side of the road, but the ditch ends up connecting eventually into streams in this area, and there's just this whole web of connected waterways
Yeah.
that end up in the river, eventually in the Maumee River, which ends up emptying into Lake Erie.
A black-capped night heron.
This area was part of the Great Black Swamp, and a big effort was made to try and drain it so that it could be used to produce crops. But because of that, you've seen what's called channelization, where they've straightened, say, large ditches or creeks to move the water more quickly. But nature had its own cleansing process where, like, if a creek twists and turns and you have rocks, that there is a cleansing process in nature, and there were wetlands around here.
Right, I was going to say
that
the Great
worked
Black
as
Swamp was
filters,
a lot of
right.
wetlands. And
Right.
that's what wetlands do. They filter a lot of the pollutants and things out.
And so it's kind of ironic that now we find out we needed those areas to help filter things from getting back into Lake Erie. So nature was pretty smart.
Right.
And we
so
need
we
to
messed
learn
with
some
it.
lessons.
Right. We messed with it, screwed it all up. Yeah. And now we're trying to figure out how to get it back to the way it was.
Howdy, boys and girls. This is Carl from the Great Black Swamp. Let me give you a couple minutes of how they've been draining the Great Black Swamp for 100 years. They're in the final phases to put field tiles all over the fields around here to prevent flooding and ponding, which causes field erosion and instant plant death when your field ponds. They have a machine that'll dig trenches. Look out here in this field and dig a trench 4 feet down, lay the field tile. The field tile will absorb all the water from the surface that's right there. That's called ponding, and that'll kill a young crop instantly. And they're gonna tile this field. Eventually, it will be connected to the ditch or the Nettle Creek, which is the largest waterway in this area, and all the water and anything they apply to it will go directly from the surface into that yellow tile, straight to the ditch or the waterway. It's a freeway. All the surface water ends up there and in the ditches rapidly. And the Great Black Swamp is dying. The aquifer below us is troubled. They're spreading more shit on it than you can imagine. And it's just tragic. I was born in the Great Black Swamp of Northwest Ohio. I have been hunting this area for years. It's quite unusual. You can hit water with a shovel. The ground's constantly sinking in some areas, which is directly in front of you. We're on County Road I-50, which was commonly called the Quarter Line Road when I was a kid. It's the partying and lovers lane. Directly in front of us is a swamp that they put a road through 100 years ago. For the past 100 years, this road has been sinking into the swamp. The county's got millions of dollars of gravel right here in front of me as they just keep filling it in. So let's take a little drive right through the center of a very nice swamp. We're going downhill into the swamp. And this has been sinking since I was a child. When the water gets high, you don't go down this road unless you got a boat. And this is the Great Black Swamp. You can launch your boat right from here, folks. This is beautiful land. Mother Nature loves this place. You can find everything here. And now we're going to climb the hill out of the swamp. The Great Black Swamp basically extended from Fort Wayne, Indiana to Toledo, Ohio. It was impassable. They would put plank roads down that would get sucked into the mud. Horses and wagons couldn't even go near this place. They would be lost. It's a cool place. Thanks for listening.
Collision, I guess I would say, between farmers, so the rural residents in that area, and the urban, so the people in the city. And what was so interesting is, the farmers think they're being blamed for the algae problem in the lake. And the people in Toledo are like, well, we're not causing this problem. We're not putting, the phosphorus and nitrogen in, but we're the ones who are suffering from the water crisis, having our water shut off, and we're the ones who have to pay for the new water treatment plant. So it really was this rural versus urban. And I tried to bring people together and say, but wait a minute, but we all need water. So let's start at the basics, what we need to survive. And it's clean water, it's clean food, clean air. And if we can start there, maybe we could sit down at the table and have a conversation. The corporations and the corporate farms and all that thing, they're going to do anything they can to deflect and divide us. And if we think we live in a democracy, we should really start acting like it. And that we do have the right to govern our communities, because that's a lot of what our work is about. It's about local self-governance. And who knows the ecosystem better than the people who live in the community? I think it's really going to have to take a lot of farmers to change their mindset. And I'm talking about the ones that are actually, still in control of what they're doing, aren't the big corporations. They're the residents in Northwest Ohio, and they're going to have to rise together to say, no, we're not doing this anymore.
My name is Rosemary Hugg. We are at our farm, and it is a mile north of Blakesley, Ohio. I met Lyle in 1963 at a dance, and within 6 weeks we were married. Moved in here to the farm. Actually, that house right there is where we started our life. This is always going to be a part of me, and it's amazing just to be sitting here, just to see how it has evolved.
My name is Lyle Hugg. I married Rosemary. I always wanted to farm. Wasn't easy. Some days I couldn't even buy a pack of gum.
My name is Corey. I'm the youngest son of Lyle and Rosemary. I've got 3 boys. My youngest one is not here, but we farm together. It's nice working with family.
Hi, I'm Kyle Hugg. I'm Corey's oldest son, and I work here with my brother and my dad. We're also a family farm, not as a corporate farm. We kind of look at things, what's better for us as a family. I mean, this is what we do. This is our lifestyle. So, whatever we can do to continue keeping us here. Who I see in the future buying farm ground are investment groups or people with hundreds of millions of dollars who can afford it. I think a lot of people now, people my age, if their parents pass away or they will them their ground, they see, oh, I can get, this much money, and I'm going to sell it to the highest bidder and not really think of the consequences of that. And then you hear people complain about, billionaires buying ground or investment groups buying ground. You don't have to sell your ground to them, but people just think of, I want the most money, and that's what I'm going to sell to is the highest bidder. Financially, we can't compete with Bill Gates.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
You'll only let them get as close to you as what you want to sell, as close as you want to sell to them. So if you want to sell, if you don't want somebody buy you, don't sell a chunk of ground off to somebody because you don't want neighbors, you don't want somebody else to be in control of it.
Maybe a good comparison, I think, to what you're asking is you think of like your local supermarket and then Walmart. Do you support local? It might not be as cheap, and they might not have everything you need, but you'd rather support local than some big corporation. So when you think about that, you might support your local farmer instead of running it out to some larger corporation farm or corporate farm, just looking at dollars. Yeah, we're not a large farm by no means.
By no means.
We're mid-size?
Mid-size for around here, probably mid-sized.
Yep.
Yes. It's not like we're intentionally putting stuff to go down the creek. By no means. Sure, I think, yeah, we probably contribute, but I don't think that it's not like we're throwing stuff out there and not, I don't know, not worrying. Go, please.
It's not like we spread fertilizer on our fields to have most of it run into the creek and then go back in Lake Erie, which benefits us, none at all. Might as well, burn your money at that point because that's not helping us at all, farm. We've implemented practices in the past, 5 years to help minimize that, and only spreading, what specific fields call for, and not overspreading. So variable rating fertilizer on all of our fields. But at the end, I think we're just an easy target. It's the farmers and all the runoff. But like I said, there's no sense for us to spread a bunch of fertilizer to have the majority of it run off and then go to the lake. That doesn't make any financial sense.
There's probably more filter strips and, waterways in now than, even, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Where the water goes, you leave grass there, and yeah, it's better for everything.
All the farms around here having a few pigs and a few cows, just having that to deal with on your own ground. Now you have larger farms, and then they can only haul their manure so far away. It's hard when you have so many animals. I mean, what are you supposed to do? Everybody likes to have cheap food, right? That is a lot of poop, and it has to go somewhere.
Yeah. As time has passed, 4 or 5 hours, the liquid cow manure is running out of this field and running right toward me, following gravity. It's not staying in the field. It's coming right to the ditch. That, right there in front of us, that liquid you see, is the manure that's running out of the field. And there is your dragline spreader. He's been out here all morning long, injecting manure.
The corporate state, during the 43 or 44 years I've been practicing law, the corporate state has become absolutely predominant. Our politics at national and even state levels are dictated so much by profiteering from dark, evil things. The corporate power has been consolidated enormously, incredibly. So when you look, for instance, at the issue of the contamination of Lake Erie and ultimately its ecological destruction because of corporate agriculture, you have to look at this huge continuum of profit. They are almost unregulated at all because of the political dictates of a huge industry. And it's a huge industry of petrochemical suppliers, Monsanto, genetically modified crops, the pharmaceutical companies that make antibiotics and other food supplements that are a necessary ingredient of rapidly raising millions of animals for slaughter. We have factory farms, animal factories, that are raising millions of fowl, tens of thousands of cattle and hogs, and are generating enormous, unimaginable amounts of manure. And you have to understand that while manure can be a beneficial additive to the soil, that the quantities we're talking about, the soil cannot assimilate, the bacteria cannot break down, and that is the genesis of the problem here in Lake Erie. The Maumee River Basin and its tributaries contain literally hundreds, possibly near 1,000 corporate farms that are animal factories.
My name is Ken Herman. I am a small dairy farmer in Northwest Ohio, Edgerton to be specific. My granddad, it's his farm, and it's been in the family for, I can't even tell you when he bought it. I watched my granddad farm, I watched my dad farm. I have farmed my whole life. I was out in the barn when I was probably 3-4 years old. On my farm, I do not use chemicals, chemical fertilizer. I do things naturally. I'm not certified organic, but I do everything pretty much organically. I'm running about 25 right now. So like I said, I'm just small. I know all my cows. My kids probably know them better than I do. They name them when they're born. They raise them up. Well, I've got 12 kids, so I have a lot of stories. My grandkids walk up there, they feed them a little bit of hay or grass by hand. They'll go out there and feed them cookies. marshmallows. They're all pasture right now. Well, look how lush that is.
Yeah, that's funny.
I mean, well, just right there at his feet, you take a look. It's about the same stuff. I mean, that's about as good. You're a vegetarian. I mean, it about makes you hungry, don't it?
Yeah. What are the ones with the horns?
Let's see. This one with the ring is a bull. The one behind him is a bull.
Mm-hmm.
The one over there with the nose combination in there, the flag, and the curved horns, she's a heifer. She's mainly Jersey, and she started out with those unique horns. That's the Elsie the cow horns that you see in the old ads.
Like.
Right.
And the kids wanted me to make sure they stayed on there, and hopefully they shape up just perfect. And it's kind of nice to have something unique.
Right.
These, if you'd walk out there, you better be careful, because if they get a hold of your clothes, they're gone.
Really?
Rip the whole their tongue.
Yep,
huh?
yep. You'll be standing there in your birthday suit. You got to find a system that works for you. And basically what I'm doing is rotational grazing. I keep changing them into different paddocks.
Yep.
And they get some awful, well, if you see that's some awful good feed this year.
Oh, with the rain we've had, that it's kept.
With the rain and this year, for some reason, the clover really come on strong.
Yeah.
And clover's a very nutritional feed.
Mm-hmm.
And just pull some and put some on your salad. I am pro-agriculture. I'm not saying agriculture don't need to change. In some areas, they don't need to improve, keep doing better. But I am pro-agriculture.
We shouldn't be afraid to talk to each other and just share our
Right.
experiences and our opinions and, whatever.
Well,
we shouldn't be afraid to do that.
And pro-nature.
Right. This is like the image that you have of a farm when you say farming.
The first thing that really got me hot under the collar was when an individual was going to sell our water from our aquifer, and went to a meeting, and I thought, they're just not doing anything. They need to call the Sierra Club, they need to call this, and they need to call your congressman. And I just thought there was all these things that you could do, and my involvement has really given me the knowledge that we're kind of at a roadblock. It just seems like we are trying to make progress to do something for the good of our county, especially, but we are stymied by our own rules and regulations. I just feel there's no justice. You're trying to do the right thing. It doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on. This is about our area right here, trying to save our water.
Because the aquifer comes from 3 states, Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio.
Right.
That makes it hard. And then it goes to the Maumee. The St. Joe goes to the Maumee and Fort Wayne, which is north of here. It runs north 4 ways, then it circles into Maumee, into Maumee, and goes back to Toledo.
Yeah.
And then that goes back north again. There's only one place, I think, United States, that does that.
Right. You can never say that you are never going to run out of water. And as the aquifer, sometimes it's portrayed as this flowing, like Lake Erie underneath us. It is not. It is all clay and gravel, and there's little pockets. And why in Williams County did that aquifer, which is underneath us, and we have the best tasting water, and then when someone decides to sell it for profit, water is not, water's sacred to me.
The problem with the regulatory approach is that the system is designed to limit the opportunities to oppose. The machinery is definitely set up to grant permits, not deny them. In particular, when you're talking about governments and corporations, they have the option of not funding research into the possible damage and long-term harms that they cause. So the regulatory model isn't producing results that favor replenishment, restoration of the environment, and at the same time, the corporate state has basically sucked a lot of the power upward in the system so that local entities, local governments, and citizenry don't have much of a role in the regulatory model, really, much of a say. They certainly don't have a veto for the most part. And we are realizing that the solutions are going to have to come from the ground up. Politicians are by and large bought off. They aren't going to be able to, they aren't saving us. They aren't here. They aren't in office to do our bidding. They're there to protect the interests of the so-called regulated agencies. So what you have is the rights of nature being increasingly talked about and understood as a situation where local people protecting their local ecology or their environment are able, under a rights of nature kind of law, to protect Lake Erie as a living, evolving, flourishing being, allowed to not be poisoned, to not be impaired, to not be water diverted.
I mean, I guess I don't understand why other people don't care as much about the lake, about their kids, and what they're doing. I mean, cancer rates are going up. There's more childhood illnesses. My son is working with children in healthcare. I mean, the rates of diseases in children keeps going up. I mean, I don't understand. It's not a hard concept to know what we do to nature, we are doing to ourselves. And the poisoning of our kids is what we're doing. Nobody says it that way, but that's what we're doing for money. We're doing it for money. And I understand everyone needs to put food on the table and everyone needs a roof over their heads, and I get that, but at what cost? It's only been like 200 years of our industrialization and all the harm we've done. And it's only been like 20, 25 years of globalization and all the harm we've done to the planet. So you have to live differently. And I think we could figure it out if we'd even understand collectively what the problem is. And it doesn't mean we have to agree on everything either. I mean, we maybe won't, but we could still come up with some basic solutions to some basic problems, I think.
I recommend snow tires in the summer and chains in the winter. Let's go for a ride. And there you have it. Through the swamps, through the hills. Bye.